Hello Math45 students, this is your instructor Cindy Enrique. We are going to wrap up chapter 8. The last section is section 8.3. It's all about the parabola. I know that we've already kind of talked about the parabola before. What we've already known about the parabola is that we have a vertex, and this is a positive parabola. It's smiling at you. This is also opening upwards. And the vertex, when I have a positive or an opening upwards parabola, the vertex actually becomes your minimum point. We also know that we have an axis of symmetry. And because that axis of symmetry goes along the x-axis, because it's a vertical line, it's always x is equal to, and let's say my vertex is h comma k, that's going to be the vertex, then that axis of symmetry is always going to be x is equal to h, which is that x value. Likewise, we've also had some information about a negative parabola. Actually, let me change colors here. We can also say that this opening is downwards. And so if we're thinking about the parabola and the vertex, there's my vertex. It's still my HK. And at this point, it's going to be my maximum point that I have. And we also have the axis of symmetry. So that's the point where if I were to cut it in half, it's symmetric. The left side should look like the right side. So the axis of symmetry should still be x is equal to h. So these are things that we already know. Now, the new information in chapter 8 is now that we have the focus, we also have something called the directrix. The directrix is just going to be that line that's going to be perpendicular to the axis of symmetry. So notice how the directrix and the axis of symmetry are perpendicular to each other. And you also have something called the foci or the focus. So sometimes we talk about this as the foci or the focus. And then also this latus rectum, you can also call them the endpoints. So usually I refer to this as the endpoints, okay? All right, so now that we have a general sense of this, we can go ahead and look at this and help us to identify the vertex, the directrix, and the endpoints for each of these parabolas. So let's just start by identifying everything that we know. So we know that this point right here is going to be the vertex. So I know that my vertex is supposed to be that special ordered pair. And here it looks like it's a -5, +4. That is that ordered pair of the vertex. So the other thing that I know, well, let's think about this. It's in yellow, but that's okay. Maybe I'll just make it in black. The axis of symmetry goes exactly through the vertex. So this line over here represents the axis of symmetry. So then the axis of symmetry. And because it's a downward opening parabola, it's always going to be x is equal to that h value. So here it's going to be a -5. So x is equal to -5. There we go. I really wanted that x to look nice. Oh, yes, the axis is equal to x is equal to -5. Perfect. So then the directrix is actually going to be perpendicular to that axis of symmetry. So that's going to be this line over here. So this line goes along the y-axis at a +5. So this is my directrix. So I'm going to say that the directrix has the equation, and it's along the y-axis, so y is equal to my positive 5. Now, I want to think about these endpoints. Well, these endpoints are on the actual parabola. So this is an endpoint. So that ordered pair looks like it's -7 and a +3. Now I have to think about the other endpoint, which is here. So that other endpoint looks like it's -3. There we go. That's a -3 and +3. So now I have my endpoints at -7, 3 and -3, 3. So the last thing that I'm going to be needing is my foci. So the foci is directly in front of the vertex. So the foci there looks like it's going to be the ordered pair -5, and that y value is a +3. So -5, 3 is going to be my foci. Okay. So that is going to be that information for that parabola. Now, let's look at the graph on the right. So this parabola looks like it's opening left, okay? So here, in case you wanted to see, its opening is to the left. So let's start going ahead and identifying some information for this parabola. So I can see my vertex. So I can say that my vertex is that special ordered pair, and it looks like the vertex is for -3. I can also tell you what the axis of symmetry, because it goes right through it. That would be this line. So the axis of symmetry is actually going through the y-axis. Since it's going through the y-axis, this is a horizontal line. So I'm going to have that y is equal to a -3. Okay, that y value is -3. Okay. So the next thing maybe you want to think about is the directrix. The directrix, remember, is perfectly perpendicular of the axis of symmetry, and it goes infinite in both directions. So that's going to be this one. So the directrix has the equation, and it's going through the x-axis. So I have x equals, and that x value is 12. So the directrix is going to be x is equal to 12. So now maybe I want to focus on my endpoints. The endpoints are exactly on your parabola. So the endpoints for that would be a -4, +13, and a -4 and a -18. Okay, so those are going to be my endpoints. So the very last thing that I'm going to need is my foci. Remember, the foci is directly in front of the vertex. So that ordered pair, reading it off the graph, it looks like the x value is -4, and my y value is going to be a -3. So I have the vertex, I have the axis of symmetry, the directrix, the endpoints, and my foci. Okay, so this is all coming from just reading it off the graph, so that way we have our terminology and our vocabulary straight for this section. Now here in this next page, what it ends up doing is it gives us some information. it tells us that if we have an opening to the left or opening to the right, then it looks like graphs A and B. So we are going to have and notice how that axis of symmetry would be along the y-axis. So this is when the x squared is going to happen, okay? So this is for A and B. Versus if we have the y squared, or actually, hold on, I think I might have done that backwards. Sorry guys, I did that without thinking too clearly. So usually what I have is my opening up and opening down, and that was that usually y is equal to my ax squared plus bx plus c. I know it to be that equation. So here, this is where I have the x squared. So this equation right here is going to go with graph C and graph D. Okay? Versus if I have opening to the left or opening to the right, that's going to be this equation. So that equation is going to be graph A and B. Okay? So depending on whether you have a y squared or an x squared, so just notice where that squared is connected to. Is it connected to the y or is it connected to the x? That will tell you whether it's going to be opening up and down or left and right, okay? And this is how we would get this information algebraically if we don't have a graph. So we need to find the directrix, the foci, and the endpoints, and the axis of symmetry. It's all going to come down to understanding this chart, okay? So look at this first example. It says for the parabola, identify the axis of symmetry, the axis of symmetry, the foci, the directrix, and the endpoints, okay? So let's think about what we have here. The square belongs on the y. So looking at this table up above, if I have the square and it belongs to the y, then I'm dealing with that top equation, the one that I circled in green. So that means I'm going to be looking at this axis of symmetry, this foci, this directrix, and this endpoints, okay? So all of that is information that I'm going to write down and put underneath to help me find that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that down. Just give me a second. Okay, so what I did is I just looked at that chart and I copied it down for my information. So I have the equation, which is that y squared is equal to 4px. I copied down the formula for the foci, for the directrix, the endpoints, and the axis of symmetry. Okay, so in case you were wondering, all I did was from here copy everything that was outlined in green. Okay, so now I can use this information to figure out what I have. So my equation here, I have this as my y squared is equal to, and here I have a 4 that needs to be fixed, and then I have some number that I'm going to be using as p. So 4 times what is going to give me this term that I have over here, and that's a negative 40. So if I think about it, well, I know I can think about this as a 4 times a negative 10. So now I know that my p-value is a negative 10. So that p equal to negative 10 is really going to help me. Now I can figure out what all this is going to mean. So now that I have my p is equal to negative 10, I can tell you what my foci is going to be. My focus is going to be negative 10, comma 0. So there's that. And I also have my directrix. It's going to be x is equal to a negative, and I have a negative 10 as my p-value. So I really have this as x is equal to a positive 10 for my directrix. And of course I have my endpoints. So my endpoints here would be 10 plus or minus 2 times 10. So would I have 10? 2 times 10 would be a positive 20. And then negative 2 times 10 would be a negative 20. And I have to be careful. What is my p-value? My p-value is negative 10. So all of those are negative 10s. Thank you. So negative 10. P is equal to a negative 10. And now since the x-axis, well, you can just say that that's really just going to be my y is equal to 0. So now I have all of the important information that I need. Okay. So we're going to use this kind of setup to help us with our second equation that we have. So we are going to want the equation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep flipping back to that chart. So now, if I go back to that chart, I'm no longer looking at the green value, because what I have is I have an x squared. So now that I have the x squared, I'm particularly looking at this one because the x is squared. So this is going to give me my axis of symmetry, my foci, my directrix, and my endpoints as well. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that down into that second part of into that equation, okay, to kind of have it as an outline. Okay, so I have my equation. Let's deal with that one first, because I have my equation as x squared is equal to 4py. The x squared here is not by itself. So I'm going to have to manipulate this just a little bit. So what I have is I have y is equal to a negative 1 over 36 times an x squared. I really want that x squared by itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So that would be negative 36. So I'm going to rewrite this as a negative 36y is equal to an x squared. So really, I can kind of flip this around to be x squared is equal to a negative 36y. And again, I still want to have that 4 component. So I have x squared is equal to, and I want it to be 4. I want to have my p-value, and I want that y there. So let's think about this. Negative 36. If I do negative 36 divided by 4, what do I get? Well, hopefully you got a negative 9. So now I know that my p-value is equal to a negative 9. So that is really going to help me find all the different pieces of information. So now when I'm thinking about the focus, and for the focus I have my equation as 0, comma, p. Well, that would be 0, negative 9. So that would be my focus. The next thing I'm going to want is the directrix. So for the directrix, that's just going to be y is equal to negative p. So if y is equal to negative p, well, my p-value was that negative 9. So I really have that y is equal to a positive 9 for my directrix. Now, the last thing I want to think about is my endpoints. So for my endpoints, I have a plus or minus 2p, comma, p. Okay. So I'm going to have plus or minus 2 times my p-value, which is a negative 9, comma, my negative 9. So this is telling me that I have a positive 2 times negative 9, comma, negative 9. That's going to be my first one. And that second one is going to be a negative 2 times a negative 9, comma, negative 9. So that gives me a negative 18, negative 9. and it gives me a positive 18, negative 9. So now I have my endpoints as well. Okay. Well, I hope that's helpful, and remember, I'm just referring back to that graph up above to help me figure this out. That's how I'm getting these formulas. Well, now the next thing I have here is that it wants me to graph the parabola. So here I have a y squared is equal to a 24x. So looking above or looking at the previous page can tell us what's going to happen when I have that y squared. So when I have that y squared, I should be thinking as it being 4px. So if I'm thinking about 24 here, well, 24 divided by 4 would give me a 6. So here my p-value is equal to 6. Okay. All right. So my vertex here is going to be 0, 0. And don't worry, I'm going to show you when it's not 0, 0. That's when you're going to have your h and k value. So you're going to have y inside parentheses and your x inside parentheses. Right now you don't have that, so you're fine. So your vertex for now is just going to be 0, 0. So then my axis of symmetry and remember, the axis of symmetry can also be found here. That's going to be my y is equal to 0, okay? The next thing I'm going to be thinking about is my foci. Well, the foci I already said was p, 0. So here my p-value is 6, so my foci is going to be 6, 0. And I also have my directrix. My directrix was going to be x is equal to negative p. So here my directrix is going to be x is equal to a negative 6, okay? And I'm also going to be having my endpoints. Remember, my endpoints come from p plus or minus 2p. So I'm going to have 6 plus or minus 2 times 6. So the first one would be 6, 2 times 6. And my part B would be 6, negative 2 times 6. So that's going to be 6 and 12, and 6 and negative 12. So this parabola is going to be slightly off the charts. And, well, that's okay. So now I have all the important information. So now I can tell you exactly what this is going to look like. So I have my vertex at 0, 0. I have my axis of symmetry, y is equal to 0. That's going to be my x-axis. And then my foci was going to be at 6, 0. And the directrix is going to be x is equal to negative 6. Okay, and my endpoints, this is where it's going to get interesting. So my endpoints are at 6 and positive 12. So I'm going to run out of room a little bit. That's okay. So I'm going to extend this graph ever so slightly. So I have 10, 11, 12. Negative 10, negative 11, negative 12. There we go. So now my graph at 6, positive 12, that's up here. And 6, negative 12, that's down here. So my parabola is very, 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 very large. Okay. this is what my parabola is looking like, okay? So I've graphed the vertex, the axis of symmetry, my foci, the directrix, and the endpoints, okay? I hope that that was helpful. Now let's go ahead and graph this parabola, and this is with an x squared. So this is something familiar. When you x squared, it's either going to be opening upward or it's going to be opening downward. So again, we're going to have all that information that we had before. So we are going to have our equation as x squared is equal to 4py. So here we have x squared is equal to 4 times p times y. So let's think about this negative 12. If I were to get that negative 12 and I divide it by 4, I get a negative 3. So I get that p is equal to a negative 3. Fantastic. So I'm going to get my vertex at 0, 0. I'm going to get my axis of symmetry at x is equal to my h value, which is 0. This is just from before. Now, here's the new stuff. If I am thinking about the foci, or the focus is 0, comma, p. Well, that p value is negative 3. So that's going to be my foci. The next piece of information that I have, or that I want, is the directrix. The directrix is y is equal to negative p. So y is equal to negative 3. So y is equal to a positive 3 for my directrix. And the last thing that I'm going to want is going to be my endpoints. So for my endpoints, I'm going to have plus or minus 2p times p. So when I plug that into my equation, I have plus or minus 2 times my p-value. That p-value is negative 3, comma, that p-value of negative 3. So I'm going to have 2 times my negative 3, comma 3. So that's going to give me negative 6, comma 3. And I also have negative 2 times negative 3. So that's going to give me a positive 6, negative 3. So I have negative 6, negative 3. Forgot to make that negative, didn't I? There we go. And then I have a positive 6, negative 3. Okay. So now I have all the important information, so now I can graph this. So I have my vertex at 0, 0. I know the axis of symmetry is going to be going through that. So that's right along the y-axis. No, I did that wrong. I'm sorry. I was just thinking like it was just like the last one, but it's not. When x is equal to 0, that's along the y-axis. So that's here. That's better. That's the axis of symmetry at x is equal to 0. There we go. Much, much, much better. Okay. And I have my focus at 0, negative 3. So that's here. Don't forget that my vertex was there. And I have my endpoints at negative 6, negative 3. And positive 6, negative 3. And I also have the, well, I guess I can graph my parabola. It's going to be very wide. It connects the vertex through the endpoints. And the last thing I needed to draw was my directrix. The directrix is y is equal to positive 3. So I have just drawn my directrix. Okay. And so I have graphed this equation, x squared is equal to a negative 12y. Like I said, we knew how to draw a parabola, but now it's in a lot more detail than we've ever done before. So now we're going to do some algebra. It says, what is the equation of the parabola with focus negative 1/2, 0, and the directrix as a positive 1/2? Well, since we have the focus, and let's think about this. The focus is I have something for the x and y value where my y value is 0. So let's think about this for my foci. Let's go back up to that chart to help us. So if I'm looking back at this chart, if I'm thinking about the foci here, remember I have this information that I'm looking at now. So we were looking at that y value having a 0. So the only y value that's a 0 would be the top equation. So I'm dealing with the y squared is equal to 4px. So this is the type of information that I'm looking for. So this is what I'm going to be writing down. And remember, that's my p-value. So I know that the general equation is that I have y squared is equal to a 4px. And here I'm already given my p-value for my foci. My p-value is equal to a negative 1/2. So I can say that my y squared is equal to 4, and that p-value is equal to a negative 1/2. So my equation would be y squared is equal to 4. Oops. 4 times a negative 1/2 would be a negative 2x. So now I know that my equation is y squared is equal to a negative 2x. The directrix at x is equal to 1/2, that's just more information. Remember that it's just going to be a negative p-value. So a negative 1/2 just tells us that the p-value is a negative 1/2. Okay? So we could have done this equation just using the focus, which we did. Okay? So now for the second equation, it says, what is the standard form of the equation of the parabola with vertex 0, 0 and focus 0, 5? So now the focus is different. Now I'm looking at the focus with the ordered pair x and y, and I have that the x value now is 0. So if you want, you can think about this by looking at the chart again. So if I'm looking at the chart again, now my information comes from my x value being 0. So here's my focus, and my x value being 0 is this one. So this is going to be the equation that I am looking at. So that gives me the x squared equation. So I know that my equation is x squared is equal to 4p times x. And so I'm going to have x squared is equal to 4. And I have my x value. We remember that for the foci, it's 0p. So it tells me that my p-value is equal to 5. So x squared is equal to 4 times 5, which is 20, x. Oops, and I wrote that wrong, didn't I? Too many x's. That should have been y. There we go. That's what happens when you are flipping through so many pages. There we go. So the general equation is x squared is equal to 4py, and in this case my p is 5, and 4 times 5 is 20, so my equation ends up becoming x squared is equal to 20y. Okay. And you might be thinking, well, you know, Cindy, what if the vertex isn't at 0, 0? Well, that brings us to our next page. If we do not have the vertex at 0, 0, but instead we have it at h and k, then this is what we're going to be looking at, okay? So the equation, instead of that y squared, would be y minus k squared. And instead of that x squared, now it's x minus h squared, okay? So hopefully you remember from, you know, our previous examples for the parabola, we used to have that y is equal to a x minus h squared plus k, where the vertex was h comma k. So now it's going to kind of make things a bit more interesting when we have these parabolas and these problems that we're going to have for here. Okay. So let's look at this first example. So I have, for each parabola, identified the axis of symmetry, the foci, the directrix, and the endpoints. So I have x minus 1 squared is equal to negative 8y minus 2. So for this particular equation, I'm going to be looking at my chart. So I'm going to go ahead and write down the general information that I need to save you guys some time. So I went ahead and copied down the information from the previous page. So I wrote down the axis of symmetry, the foci, the directrix, the endpoints, and the general equation. So this is really going to help us to figure out these problems. So let's think about this. So what do I have here? So if I have h, that would be my h value. So here my h value would be equal to 1. And I also have my k value. My k value here would be equal to 2. Now I just have to think about, well, what would actually be my p value? So let's think about this. What am I going to plug in here? So I have my x minus 1 squared is equal to my 4. I have my p value, and I have my y minus my 2 value. So let's think about this. What is negative 8 divided by 4? Well, negative 8 divided by 4 is a negative 2. So now I know that my p value is equal to a negative 2. So I have that h is equal to 1, k is equal to 2, and p is equal to a negative 2. So now I can tell you some information. Remember that my vertex is always just going to be h comma k. So my h value is 1 and my k value is 2. So now I have my vertex. Okay. Now the next piece of information that I have is the axis of symmetry. So the axis of symmetry is just going to be my x is equal to h. So that h value is 1. So now I have my axis of symmetry. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to be wanting is the foci. So for the focus, I know it's up here. So I know that it's h, which is 1, my k value, which is 2, plus my p value, and my p value is a negative 2. So I'm going to have this as 1 comma 2 plus negative 2, well, that's going to be 0. So my focus is going to be 0. Okay. Now let's think about my directrix. My directrix is going to be y is equal to my k value, which is 2, minus my p value. That p value I got as a negative 2. So I'm going to get y is equal to 2 plus 2, so y is equal to a positive 4. Okay? And it looks like the last thing I'm going to be wanting is my endpoints. So my endpoints, I have h, which is 1, plus 2 times my p-value, which is a negative 2. And then I have k, which is 2, plus my h value, which is 1. So I have 1 plus negative 4, 3. So I'm going to have 1 plus negative 4, which is actually just going to give me a negative 3, comma 3 for my endpoints. And don't forget that the endpoints was plus or minus p. So I did the positive part of it. Now I want to do the minus part of it. So now I'm going to have the h value, which is 1, and I'm going to say minus 2 times my p value, which is a negative 2. And then I'm going to have my k value, which is 2, plus my h value, which is 1. So I'm going to have 1 plus 4, comma 3, which would give me a 5, comma 3. And you guys, I'm looking at this and I'm just making sure I wrote this down right. So this is what I was looking for my endpoints. It's h plus or minus 2p, comma k plus p. And so when I'm looking at this for my endpoints, it looks like I actually wrote it incorrectly. And that happens in math sometimes, and that's okay. I don't have to be perfect. So I know it should have been my h plus or minus 2p, but then here this is what it should have been. It should have been k plus p. So I messed up on one of them. And that's okay. Math doesn't always have to be perfect. And if you have an error, it doesn't mean to give up, you're over it. You know, I'm a mathematician. I have both my bachelor's degree and my master's in mathematics, and sometimes I'm going to make a mistake. And sometimes that mistake can just be, hey, I just copied down the formula wrong, and that's okay. So now I'm going to be really, really careful about writing down these endpoints. So I know that my endpoints, and I'm going to go ahead and just give myself some more room over here. And this is why we have erasers, because people make mistakes. Now I'm going to write it down very clearly that this is h plus or minus 2p, comma, k plus p. Now I'm going to write down the information that I have. I know that my h value is equal to 1. I know that my k value is equal to 2. And I know that my p value is equal to a negative 2. Okay, so I'm going to take this slow. So the first one I'm going to do is the plus part. So I'm going to have my h value, which is 1, plus 2 times my p value, which is negative 2, comma, my k, which is 2, plus my p value, which is negative 2. So I'm going to have 1 plus negative 4 and 0. So now I have negative 3 and 0. So that is one of my endpoints. And now I'm going to do the other endpoint as that minus. So I'm going to have my h value as 1 minus 2 times my p value, comma, k plus my p value. So I'm going to have 1 plus 4, comma 0. So that's 5 comma 0 as my other endpoint. Okay. So this is why it's important to go slow and make sure that you write down the formula correctly. So here I have the k plus p as the endpoint. Okay. And for part B, it's going to be very, very similar. So I'm going to be super careful to write down the correct formula. Okay. So go ahead and check my formulas with me as we go through it. Well, actually, before I look at the formula, I already know where the squared is. The square belongs on the y, and I'm pretty sure that I need to get that y by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And for me, I like to have things in order. So I know that that y squared is on the left-hand side. So I'm just going to switch the opposite sides of the equal sign. So I'm going to have a negative 1/8 y plus 3 squared is equal to my x plus 2. That does not change anything in my formula. I just like to get that y squared on the left-hand side. Now, to get that y parentheses squared on one side, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So if I multiply by the reciprocal, that would be a negative 8 over 1. So then that way it can cancel. So I'm left with the y plus 3 squared is equal to a negative 8 x plus 2. And in multiplication, it doesn't matter which way that you, it doesn't matter if it's 3 times 4 or 4 times 3. Multiplication order doesn't matter. Okay, now I'm definitely going to be looking at those equations and writing down my formulas correctly. Okay, so I have my general equation as my y minus k squared is equal to a 4p times my x minus h squared. So if I rewrite this, maybe I should write that in green, that'd make it better. There we go. So I can definitely tell you what my h and my k is going to be. I can tell you that my h value is going to be a negative 2, and my k value is going to be a negative 3. So that tells me that my vertex is a negative 2, negative 3. Just by looking at that. But I still want to be able to get that p value. So let's go ahead and get that. So I definitely have my y plus 3 squared is equal to 4, and my x minus h. So that p value, well, what's negative 8 divided by 4? Well, negative 8 divided by 4 is going to give me a negative 2. So now I note that my p value is equal to a negative 2. So now I have all the pieces of information to give you. So some other things that I know is going to be my axis of symmetry. For my axis of symmetry, that's y is equal to k. So here my k value is negative 3. So I'm going to have that y is equal to a negative 3. That is going to be the axis of symmetry here. Now, the next piece of information that I'm going to be using is the focus. The focus is going to be h plus p, comma, k. So the h value is negative 2. I'm going to add it to my p value, which is negative 2, and my k value, which is negative 3. So I'm going to have a negative 4, negative 3 as my focus. Now I can think about my directrix. Maybe I'll use my directrix down here. the directrix is going to be x is equal to h minus p. So my h value is -2, and my p value is -2. So if I have subtract a negative number, it becomes 2 adding a positive number. So x is equal to -2 plus 2. So x is equal to 0. So that is going to be my directrix. X is equal to 0. And now the last thing I want to think about is my endpoints. My endpoints, and I've double triple checked it, I have written it correctly. It is h plus p, comma, k plus or minus my 2p. So we're just going to plug in these values. So my h value is -2, plus my p value, which is a -2, my k value, -3, plus or minus 2 times my p value, which is -2. So I'm going to have -2 times -2, which is -4, comma, -3 plus or minus, and now I have 2 times -2. Well, actually, yeah, that's fine. 2 times -2 is a -4. So I'm going to have -4, and I'm going to have -3 plus -4. That's going to give me a -7. Now I'm going to do -3 minus -4. Well, -3 minus -4 turns into -3 plus 4, which turns into a positive 1. So I'm going to have -4, comma, 1 as my endpoints. Okay, well, I hope that that is helpful. I hope that I explained it clearly and methodically. And of course, we have more practice problems. So we want to graph the parabola that has y minus 1 squared is equal to a -16x plus 3. So this is where we are going to find the vertex and also the general equation. So remember that my general equation, we're going to have y minus my k squared is equal to 4p x minus my h. So I definitely have my y minus my 1 squared is equal to 4 p value x plus 3. So that p value is going to come from dividing -16 by 4. So -16 divided by 4 gives me a -4. So that tells me that p is equal to a -4 value. And I have my h value. My h value here would be a -3. And my k value here is a positive 1. So I can tell you that my vertex, since it's always going to be h and k, I can tell you that that h value is -3 and that k value is a positive 1. So I have my vertex as -3, positive 1. So there is my vertex, okay? I can also tell you the axis of symmetry. Well, I know that my axis of symmetry is going to be y is equal to k. So here, y is equal to that k value, so y is equal to 1. So there is my axis of symmetry. Now, the next thing I want to give is my focus. My focus here is going to be h plus p, comma, k. So here my h value is -3 plus my p value, which is -4, and my k value, which is +1. So I'm going to have this as -7, +1. So there is my focus. Now I'm going to think about the directrix. The directrix is going to be x is equal to h minus p. So my h value is -3 and my p value is -4. So I'm going to get that x is equal to a +1. So x is equal to +1 is going to be vertical. Okay. And then the last thing to help me graph everything is going to be my endpoints. So for my endpoints, and this is where you have to write it down carefully, you have h plus p. That's going to be the first ordered pair. And that second ordered pair is going to be k plus or minus 2p. So I'm going to copy this down. So I know my h value here is a -3. I know that my p value is a -4. I know that my k value is a +1. And again, my p value is a -4. So I have -3 plus -4, which is a -7. And I have 1 plus or minus -8. So if I do 1 plus -8, that would give me -7. If I do 1 minus -8, that would give me a +9. So I have -7, -7, and I have -7, +9. So I know that the vertex goes through those endpoints. So that is what my graph is going to look like. Okay. And I have another graph here that I'm going to go ahead and do. So now that I want to be graphing this, I definitely know that it's going to be a parabola. And the reason I know it's a parabola is because I have an x squared and a y that's by itself. So my goal is to get the x's collected on one side and everything else on the opposite side. So then I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to have my x squared minus my 8x. And this is where I'm going to start moving things to the opposite side. So I'm going to have a positive, since I'm going to be adding 28y to both sides. So I'm going to have a positive 28y on that side. And I'm also going to be adding 208 to the opposite side as well. So plus 208. So then over to the side, I'm going to do my completing the square. Hopefully you remember the completing the square. Hopefully you remember it is x plus your b divided by 2 squared is equal to your c plus your b divided by 2 squared value. So here my b value is equal to 8. So then b divided by 2 would equal to 4. And if I were to square 4, that would give me my 16. So this is how it's going to play. So I'm going to have my parentheses squared. and I still have my 28y plus my 208. That hasn't changed at all. Now I'm going to be performing the completing the square. So I have x, and in this case I have my b divided by 2 value, so that's going to be my negative 4. And since I have to add it to the opposite side, that square value, this is where I add the 16 to that side. So now I have my x minus 4 squared is equal to 28y plus, and now I'm going to add, so 208 plus my 16, and I get a positive 224. And remember, for these types of equations, we always want to get the y kind of inside its parentheses as well. So we can go ahead and do that. So let's think if we can factor the right-hand side. Well, if I have 28 and 220y, I can actually see that 28 is a GCF. So I'm going to go ahead and factor that out. So I'm going to have x minus y squared. And factoring these numbers together, this 28 and this 224, the GCF there is 28. So 224 divided by 28 is a positive 8. Okay, so remembering our forms here, we know that our general equation, we have the x minus the h squared is equal to 4p y minus my k. So I can have x minus 4 squared is equal to 4 and my y plus 8 value. So that p value, 28 divided by 4, gives me 7. So now I know that I have my h value as 4, my k value as negative 8, and I also have my p value as a positive 7. So that gives me a lot of information to work with. So I can tell you my vertex, since it's just h comma k, so that's 4 comma negative 8. So my vertex is 4, negative 8. So I'm going to go ahead and make that ordered pair there. So that's my 4, negative 8. Now I can tell you the axis of symmetry. Remember, the axis of symmetry is really that x is equal to h value. So here x is equal to the h value, which would be 4. So that is going to be my axis of symmetry. The next thing I'm going to be looking at is the foci. The foci I have as h, comma, k plus p. So my h value is 4, k is negative 8, plus my p value is 7. So really I have 4 and negative 1 as my foci. So there is my foci. And of course I want my directrix. The directrix is going to be that y is equal to k minus p. So I'm going to have that y is equal to my k value, which is negative 8, minus my p value, which is 7. So y is equal to a negative 15. And negative 15 is kind of off the chart, so I'm not going to worry about it too much, but at least I have it in case I need it. And of course, the last thing that I need is going to be my endpoints. My endpoints are really important, and I'm going to make sure I write the equation right this time. So I have my h plus or minus 2p and then I have k plus p. Make sure you write it down correctly. If you don't write it down correctly, it gets messed up. So I'm just going to rewrite it, k plus p. There we go. So now I'm just going to plug in my values. So I have my h value, which is 4. And I have my p value, which is 7. And I have my k value, which is -8. And it's being added by my p value, which is 7. So I really have 4 plus or minus 14 and -8 plus 7, which is a -1. So part A, I'm going to add 4 plus 14. That is going to give me a positive 18, and I have my -1. Now I'm going to do the subtraction. 4 minus 14, that's going to be a -10, and I still have my -1. So here are my endpoints. So again, I'm a bit off the charts, but that's okay. So I have my -10, -1, so that's there. And -18, -1, well, that's way over here, but I don't want to mess up my graph too much. So I'm just going to more or less draw it where I know it's going to be going off the charts. Okay? And that's okay if your graph doesn't fit on your graph. Sometimes that happens, and that's just the way life goes sometimes. Okay. Well, I hope that gives you the general idea. Oh, and this is going to be our last problem for this section, for this chapter. So it says, what is the standard form of the equation of the parabola with focus 7, -1, and the directrix is y is equal to -5? So let's think about this focus. The focus is 7, -1, and the directrix is x is equal to -5. So what's going to help us is what the directrix is going to equal to. So if the directrix is going to be equal to x equals to a number, well, if x is equal to a number, then that's going to be the general equation of my y minus k squared is equal to my 4p x minus h, okay? And it was all because the directrix was equal to x equals to a number, okay? So here, of my directrix, the general form for the directrix is going to be x is equal to h minus p. And here I have x is equal to a -5, all right? The other piece of information that I have is my focus. The focus is going to be given to you as an equation. That's h plus p, comma, k. So I have that as 7, comma, -1. So at least that tells me that my k value is equal to a -1. So that's nice. And everything else I can kind of figure out on my own. So now that I have that, well, I have two different equations. I have that my h plus p is equal to 7 from the focus, but from the directrix I have that h minus p is equal to a -5. So this is an equation of two ordered pairs, or two equations, two unknowns. So I can add them together. So I'm going to have 2h. The p's would cancel out. So 7 minus 5 be a +2. So h is equal to a +1. So now I have my k value and I have my h value. And if I plug it back in, I can give you my p value. So It doesn't matter which one. Let's go ahead and use the Directrix. So I have that h minus p is equal to -5. So my h value here that I got is 1. So then if I subtract 1 from both sides, I'm going to get that -p is equal to a -6. And to divide each side by -1, I get that p is equal to a +6. So I'm like, perfect. Now I have all the pieces of information. I have my h, my k, and my p value. Now I can plug it into this equation. So I have y minus my k value. My k value is a -1. And my p value here is a +6. And my h value that I found was a +1. So I really have this as y plus 1 squared is equal to 24x minus 1. And that is going to be my final answer. That is the standard form of the equation. And that is all. That is the last problem that we have. I hope this section makes sense to you. And if it doesn't, or if you need more clarification, please email me. You can also contact the Math Success Center, and we also have an embedded tutor. So there are resources for you. And of course, our homework on Newton, they have videos as well. So there's plenty of places to reach out for help if any of this was confusing. Okay, till next video. See ya.